That's Xavier Rudd with Stony Creek, and in a moment, the Foo Fighters with Big Me. Well, there's been a lot of attention on the agricultural front to the announcement by the federal government yesterday that it would bring in the Ag Visa, the long-awaited agricultural visa, a made-for-purpose means of bringing in workers from overseas so that you can get your crop harvested at your meat processing plant, can get the workers you need to get the job done when it needs to be done in season. Now, it's a partnership situation where they're going to need the help of the states. It's well and good for the coalition government federally to say, well, we're going to have an agricultural visa. But if the states under the current pandemic are not willing to come to the party of bringing those workers in, and we saw this most pointedly in Victoria with the horticultural workers that were needed to pick crops that actually rotted on the trees or on the vines because the workers, there was a lot of mucking around and posturing by the Andrews government. They eventually brought some in through Tasmania. And there's comments from Peter Walsh, the Nationals MP for Northern Victoria's Murray Plains electorate. He's also the leader of the Nationals and deputy opposition leader. He said, look, Daniel Andrews is talking about bringing 1,500 people in. It's more like 20,000 or more, he says, that are needed just in horticulture alone. And as we saw these announcements coming through and then the responses from commodity groups, we went to the South Australian Agriculture Minister saying, well, what's your reaction to this Ag Visa? And asked these pointed questions because with lockdowns as it stands at the moment in regional Victoria and regional New South Wales, South Australia without lockdowns could well become a hub for those workers needed in the southeast of the nation, in the Murray-Darling Basin and all those tributaries where there is fruit growing and indeed the winter crop needing to come off the paddocks as well. So they said, look, the federal government have not asked us yet to get involved in that way, but they said that the Federal Minister for Agriculture, David Littleproud, had hailed South Australia's system as a gold standard, the one that they had for bringing Pacific Island workers into Paringa in the Riverland of South Australia, pretty close to the border, to be honest, not far from Mildura and the Sunraysia and Mallee districts. Now, the focus of the Ag Visa for the time being is certainly going to be on Pacific Island workers, and those are the ones that have been in the Riverland doing a lot of great work, the Tongans and others, and there is probably, because there's not really a pandemic problem, a COVID problem in those countries, that is the easy source of workers. But the commentary around the Ag Visa was also that Southeast Asian nations such as Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines and even South Korea could be sources of this labour as well. Now, there was an interesting comment from the grain growers' peak body. They were saying, well, this is all nice, but we need people who can come in with the grain harvests that are actually got the skills that we need to get that crop off of the paddock. And they're talking about bringing workers in from the Northern Hemisphere. So there is a lot more consultation needed. This Ag Visa becomes active in 5 weeks' time, and they're going to need to quarantine for 2 weeks before they can actually be involved out there on the paddock. And God knows exactly what will be the situation in regional Victoria and New South Wales in terms of whether these workers can actually go and help with the harvest if you're still under lockdown in those districts. Premier Gladys Berejiklian's got Sydney locked down till the end of September. At this stage, she's declared that. She said maybe regional New South Wales will come out of lockdown sooner. So I think that just like they've got a national cabinet arrangement, which I think's a bit of a talk fest and a bit shonky when it comes to the secrecy surrounding national cabinet, they're going to need some sort of collaboration like the peak body of agricultural ministers. I think it's called SCAG, the Standing Committee on Agricultural Ministers. They're going to have to sort this out because they can't just rely on each state to do what's best for them. In the past, there'd been some heavy leaning on New South Wales. They'd brought workers in, quarantine them, and then were willing to send them to other parts of the country. Well, it's probably Queensland where some of those workers are going to have to come in at first at the moment when they've been working in the northern part of the state nation and then come down to the south. I just think this is a looming problem for the agriculture industry and the need for labour. They've been crying out for workers. The New South Wales Farmers Federation and the Victorian Farmers Federation have welcomed this announcement, especially for their horticulture sectors. But silence from Primary Producers SA, not really a strong peak representative body for horticulture in SA. But in the end, the workers are going to be needed, and it's going to take state ministers, agriculture ministers, Marshall in New South Wales, Mary-Ann Thomas in Victoria and David Basham in South Australia to put aside political differences and make sure we can get the workers in under these visas so that we don't blow it when we've got a good crop coming through, great growing conditions. Wouldn't it be absolutely awful if it's rotting out there in the paddock because we just don't have the workers to get it into the processing facilities?